So we discussed that we can create base data sets either from a file which is being picked from a file server from SFTP or from a custom report. So we are looking at the option to create a base data set from a custom report now. And for that, we discussed that there are a few prerequisites. Okay, having discussed that, let's get right into creating our first base data set from a custom report. Okay, just give me a second and let's, all right, so data catalog, and I want to create a new base data set. So I'll go to the option create. I'll select the, so these are the three options for creating a base data set. I am selecting the option from custom report. Okay, the first thing we'll have to select the custom report. So I have already created my custom report. Let me first create base data sets and then we'll also have to discuss the scenario, because unless we discuss the scenario of what we are ultimately trying to achieve, you'll not understand this whole uh, logic, right? So ultimately I'm trying to do some transformation, and for that what data I am importing and how I intend to manipulate it is something we'll have to understand. Okay, I am importing some data from Workday, and we know when we import some data from Workday we use custom reports for that, and that's what I'm doing. We look at the
You
structure
import
of,
some data from the Workday means I didn't get you. What does it mean?
okay, so what did I do, what did I mention? Prism Analytics allows you to do, it allows you to bring in data from multiple sources, right? And these could be Workday source or non-Workday source. So if I can, you can bring in Workday data and on or non-Workday data,
Okay.
right? And
Okay.
how do you bring your data which is there in Workday? So let's say you have two companies, one company, or let's say your company operates from US and India. So your US population is already on Workday and your India population is not on Workday,
Yeah.
right? Now you want to bring both that data together using Prism Analytics and do your analysis,
Okay.
right? So all your employees who are in Workday, which is your US population, you want to pull that data into your Prism environment through a custom report, right?
Okay.
So Prism environment is also part of Workday, but it is logically separated. So if you have hired an employee in Workday, it doesn't mean that employee would automatically appear in your Prism tables or your Prism data sets. So for
Oh.
that, you'll have to create that custom. So it's a logically segregated environment from the rest of the Workday environment.
Okay.
Okay. So
Okay.
any data
So
you have to
Workday is
analyze,
also considered as a separate kind of data set for the
exactly,
Prism. Okay.
exactly, or a data source.
Okay.
So
Data
why
source.
would you get data from a custom report? If you see again, to consume Workday data, you need a custom report.
Okay. So you can't directly get it. You have to use a custom report. Then only
Exactly.
you get the data to Prism.
Exactly.
Oh,
All
okay.
right.
Interesting.
Okay. So for that, I am creating. Uh, I'll have to proxy as a different user. Actually, this user doesn't have all the authorizations. So I'm proxying in as a different user. The data catalog, it takes me to the same screen. Create from custom report. And I'm selecting this as my custom report. Let me run this custom report and show you what that report gets me. So through this custom report, I am basically trying to extract the company structure that exists in Workday. If I go ahead and run this report separately, it gives me all the companies which exist in my organization and the associated sector they belong to. All right. So my company, which is North America, it belongs to, so let's consider Reliance as an example, right? So Reliance is into retail. It's also into um, uh, uh, mobile infrastructure, which is Reliance Jio, and it's into different sectors, right? Similarly, my company is in different structures in different sectors. Asia Pacific, which belongs to IT. Latin America belongs to life sciences. Europe is industry. Middle East is others, and so on and so forth. So from Workday, obviously this data is in Workday, and I want to pull this data from Workday into Prism. And for doing that, I'm using this custom report. All right. Okay, so I've selected, the first thing that you do is select the custom report. And for that, it has to meet those prerequisites that we have
So
discussed.
where did you select this custom report, in the base database
Here,
or
yes.
base
So I
database? You
selected,
selected the custom report. Okay.
yes, right. So in here, I selected my custom report. Now, if this report has any report parameters, I'll have to specify here. What do I mean by report parameters? Basically selection options, and we'll look at that as well. This report doesn't have any report parameters. So if you see, when I run this report, I don't have to enter any selection criteria or any parameters. The moment I run it, it executes and gives me the output. Okay. The next thing, I have the ability to restrict my data set to specific environments. Now, why would I need to do that? So what happens is, many a times now when you create this data set here in your test tenant or your build tenant, you'll then move it to your sandbox, for example, and then from there you'll move it to production, ultimately where you're going to deploy it, right? Now, you don't want, and in production is where you do all your data loads, right? Now, you have specified, let's say, before migrating these changes to production, you specify all of your non-production tenants. And the reason for doing that is that you don't want someone to by mistake move this to production and run this in production, right? So whatever environments you specify here, even when someone, let's say, by mistakes now migrates this data set to production and executes this, it will not execute because you have restricted this data set only for your non-production environments, right? So when a given data set is executed, it will basically check the list of restricted to environments. And if the environment in which that data set is being executed is not listed out here, it will not run. It will give you an error, right? So it is just a foolproof mechanism just to ensure that people don't by mistake run it in production before it has to be before it goes live. But
Okay.
even,
So
right?
I have a question. If that GF report, what is the custom report you said, GF01 company structure report,
Mhm,
right now it is connected to the dev, for
mhm,
example, dev data,
mhm.
whatever the data you are seeing in GF is a dev data. Okay. Now, tomorrow, I want that report to be on production.
Mhm.
So it automatically refreshes that connection to the production, or do you have to go back to that report and do the connection change that to dev to production?
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. Could you please
The
report it?
custom report,
Repeat it?
whatever the GF-01 is there, that is a query developed on the report or the query, whatever it is, that developed on dev.
No,
dev data?
yeah, it will work. So that way Workday doesn't have any restriction. So if I move this report to production, it will still
Okay.
get me the same results or whatever results are there in production.
Yeah. So if it all, because production, you want a production database to be connected, the report to be on the production, right?
Mm, yes.
The custom report to be on the production. So you have to
Yes.
change the database connection for the production one.
No,
Okay.
no, you don't have to do that. You just have to move this report to production or build this report to production. So those are not required in Workday. So the
So it
database.
automatically
So in
understands
work,
that it is you are in
yes,
a production environment. So take the data from the
yes,
production server only.
yes. So in Workday, there's no concept of a database, right?
Mm, mm,
Forget that there's anything called database in Workday. So
mm.
no connections, nothing of that is required. If I'm running a report in a given environment, it will get me data from that environment. As simple as that. Okay.
Interesting.
So there's
Mm.
no concept of a database, those connections, those backend setups, nothing of that is required. Okay. All right. So here I have the ability to specify one or multiple environments to which I want to restrict this data set. If I don't specify any restricted to environments, then it is open to running in any environment. Okay. And that is what I'm going to do now. I'll select OK. Okay. Now, when I'm creating my data set and I have specified my custom report, I have to basically define how often do I want to get data into my custom report.
Mhm,
How often do I want to get data into my Prism environment from that data source? So
mhm,
here I can specify just get me data now when I'm creating my data set, or I can also define a regular schedule. So I can say run every month, let's say on the 31st or the last day of the month, and get the latest data, right?
mhm.
Obviously, in Workday, your data would keep getting changed, right? You'll have new employees getting hired, and you want to get their data as well,
Yeah.
right? So you can either run it now, which is what I'll select now for now, or you can say, okay, run it only once in the future, that is today, 12 o'clock, just as an example. Or you can also define a recurrence. You can say run it on a daily basis and get whatever new data is available, or run
Mm,
it on a weekly basis or a monthly basis or any frequency you can define. So we'll look
mhm.
at this integration schedule later. For now, I'm just saying
Yeah, I
run
have
it
a doubt on the
now.
dependent and
That
your
again,
customer.
we'll
Yeah.
we'll talk about that later.
Okay.
Okay. So that schedule uh, is something we'll discuss later. So for
Okay.
now, we are only concentrating on creating our data
Yeah.
set. So for
Okay.
creating our data set, I want to run this report now, and I'll say okay. Okay, now I'll have to give a name to my data set. Once you have given a name, you'll not be able to change it. So be careful, give a proper name. If you realize that you give given some name that you want to change it.
Can you, what did you do? You just click OK when you
Okay,
got the schedule, you
yeah,
just click OK. Sorry, I missed that step.
just okay. Okay, you just have to navigate through these different screens. That's all
That's it.
you have
Okay,
to do.
okay, okay. Okay.
All right, so what I'll do is I'll give this the name of basically the batch that is Jan 5th,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll give it, so this is my base data set, so I'll call it BDS01. This is my first base data set, and I'm creating this at the very using a custom report, so I'll simply call it CR, and I'm getting company details. So I would always give some meaningful name which can be used to identify whether it is a base data set, or when we create derived data set later we'll say DDS. We'll give appropriate name, and we'll also specify the source. So here I'm using CR to identify that I have created this data set using a custom report. Okay, but as such there's no restriction. You can give some meaningful name for use your data sets. Okay,
Okay.
now as I mentioned, we can define that schedule for getting data from the data source. So let's say I define the schedule saying get data every week, right? Now when I get data every week, what would happen to the data which already exists in the data set,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I can say delete all data which already exists in the data set
Mm.
and replace it with new data that comes in during every data acquisition run.
Mm.
So I can basically get data in two modes. Either I can get it in replace mode, wherein I'm replacing all data which already exists in my data set, or I may say, okay, don't replace it, only append new data, right? So in that case, your data which already exists, it will still remain there, and whatever new data is coming in, it will keep getting appended. Okay, having said that, always be careful with append mode. So let's say I run this data set on a daily basis. Now if you see daily basis, this is the data which exists in my system.
Mm.
And if I run this in append mode on
Mm-hmm.
a daily basis, the same records will keep getting appended, right? So
We are
this would
appending
lead
it,
to
why
be,
it will affect it?
sorry,
When you are appending it, whatever is existing, you have a 10 rows, it will append to the 11th row. That's it, right?
yeah, okay. So let's say let's assume I'm getting employee details
Mm-hmm.
and I have two employees, EMP1 and EMP2,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm getting their date of birth, let's say 1990 and 1995.
Mm-hmm.
So I run this data set to get data for the very first time, and both these employees are in the data set, right? And now I have scheduled saying get me data every day, right? Or let's say every week, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
So the next time that this integration runs, it
Mm-hmm.
would still there are two employees in my system, employee 1 and employee 2.
Mm-hmm.
So the next time this integration runs, the same employees would again come and then they would get appended. So now, even though there are just two employees in my Workday system, in my data set there are four records
Oh.
because I'm not replacing any data in my data set. I'm basically appending the data in my data set. Okay, let's say the next week it runs. Now a new employee was hired whose
Mm-hmm.
date of birth is 2000. Again,
Mm-hmm.
my data set runs. It runs in the append mode. All this data gets picked and gets appended. So if you see
Oh,
now
the meaning of
employee
append
one,
is this one. Okay. Yeah, okay, got it.
okay,
So I was thinking if employee 1, employee 2 is already there, append means employee 3 is
no,
newly
no, no,
joined, then it will update it.
no.
Okay. Like an
So that
incremental.
yes, so that duplicate check doesn't happen. So
Oh.
why would you need an append? Wherein let's say you want to get some trending output. So you want to understand what was your worker count in January, what is your worker count in February. So for that, if you see, you need to get data, full data every month. So only when you want to do some trending reporting, wherein you want to do month by month or week by week or year by year comparison, then use the append mode. If that is not the case, always use replace mode.
It looks better on if you have a data of
Hmm.
small data like HR data or anything is like a kind
Yeah,
of
exactly.
hardly you'll have millions or million or anything. But
Right.
if you see the financial data, you have millions
Mhm.
of records. If you keep
Yeah,
on replace every time, that is a
right.
big burden, right?
So I have worked in a project wherein they were dealing with 19 billion records,
Mm-hmm.
right?
So
So yes,
replace every day replacing is okay.
they were appending it because they had to do month by. See, when you give financial data as an example, you want to
Mm-hmm.
do an analysis of let's say year by year profit margins. So
Mm-hmm.
in that
Mm-hmm.
case, you need data for every year. You cannot say, okay, just replace all data which exists, right? So there you need to continuously append data,
Okay, based on the year
right?
to year, you have to append
Exactly.
it.
So replace Workday deletes existing data in the data set and replaces it with the data it imports from custom report during each
Okay.
run.
Mm-hmm.
Append Workday keeps the existing data and adds to it the new data it imports.
Yeah, new data it imports, it is saying, right? When you said it is recopied.
It is recopied, right? So Workday imports all data in the report, resulting in duplicate data, right? So the keyword here is
Mm-hmm.
it imports all data in the report during every run, resulting in duplicate data. Okay, so you only select an append mode when you need a snapshot of the custom report for maintaining your history, which is
Now,
when you actually need to do some trending kind of analysis. So how is your data changing on a month by month basis or a year by year basis? Else, always use replace mode. Okay, I would click on OK. Now my data set is created. Let's click on OK.
when you are later, I just want to explore the append option. Can you give me example of append of the data that we can do? Later class is also fine. But
I
because
gave you the
that doesn't
example, right?
mean,
For your
yeah,
financials, you want to do a year on year analysis. So you want to
yeah,
understand.
because append they are talking like in an incremental kind of situation. So usually we go for the incremental, not go with the replace at all. Incremental
Yes.
because it will reduce load a lot on the system. So
Okay,
when
but
I take
Workday
the
doesn't.
pen, what are the options for making as a trendy? Is there some kind of criteria you have to mention, like monthly? If you say January data or the February data, some kind of filtering you need to do to get that screenshot or the data to append it, right? So I just
Exactly.
want
So for
to.
Anita, okay. See, uh, okay, let me explain this once again. So when
Mm-hmm,
you create a data set and when you select the option as append,
mm-hmm,
system basically checks all data which your report is pulling
mm-hmm.
and adds that data to the existing data. So this is how Workday functionality is. If you only want to get incremental data, then design your custom report in such a way that it gets you incremental data. But this is how the Prism functionality works. Okay, and you cannot change it. So it will always get the data which your custom report is fetching and it will append that data. Okay. Uh, all right. Now if you see my data set is created, it's created in replace mode. The source for my data set is a Workday report. Now, unlike a table, if you see, Workday has already identified all the fields in my data set. So unlike a database wherein I first need to define a table and then in that table I need to add data, a data set is a different logic. I created this data set using a custom report, and when I did that, this data set identified all the columns which existed in that custom report, which is the name of the company, the Workday ID, and it simply used those columns to define the data set. I don't have to do that explicitly. Okay, not just that, if I click here, it shows me all the data that is imported. So all data which was getting fetched from the custom report is imported into this data set. All right. So I see company name, company ID, sector, parent company ID. These columns are imported. Okay. In addition to this, in addition to importing the columns from the custom report, Workday adds a couple of new columns. So if you see, in addition to these 5 columns, I see 2 new columns which are added. One is WPA load ID and WPA load timestamp. So these 2 columns Workday automatically adds whenever you're creating a custom report whenever you're creating a data set using a custom report. Okay, what is load ID? This is the unique ID for the integration run using which you loaded that row of data, right? So this allows you to uniquely identify. So let's say again, if I take daily run as an example. So on a daily basis, you're loading data into your data set. Now you want to uniquely identify through which load a given record was loaded. So this ID allows you to identify that. Now in this case, if you see, the ID is basically same because all these records were loaded as part of the same load. The second thing, the load timestamp, it identifies when that record was loaded. So again, all these records, if you see, we loaded them just now. So the timestamp is the same for all of these records, right? So these are the two fields that Workday automatically adds, and I can see those fields here. So company name, company Workday ID, sector. So apart from these 5 fields which were there in my custom report, Workday has added these 2 fields automatically. All right. So I have created a base data set, and using that base data set, I have loaded data into my Prism environment, right? And the data source for this base data set is our custom report. Okay. All right. Now, 2 things very critical. If you go to your data catalog, what you'll see is you'll see all the data sets listed out here. Now, when you're dealing with multiple projects, this would get really confusing, right? If you see, there are so many data sets. So searching for information becomes difficult. 2 ways to manage this. The first one, give meaningful names to your data sets, right? Use proper naming conventions to identify data set created for a given requirement. The second thing, use your tags. This is something we discussed earlier as well. So now I want to create a new tag and assign it to my data set that I created. So I'll click on this tag icon. I want to assign it to a tag. Let's say WP Jan 5th. So every object I am creating, I want to assign it to this tag. I'm creating this as a new tag for the first time. So I'll select this option, create new tag, and save this. So the advantage is I can search for this tag now. So tags allows you to manage the complexity of your data sets or the list of data sets in your data catalog, right? So always remember to use tags.
Okay.
All right.
So there
Okay.
is no
So
creation of table. You are directly getting the data. I'm just trying to understand the flow.
exactly,
We are
exactly,
directly getting data with a base data set with a report. Okay. Custom.
exactly.
Okay.
All right. So in this sense, if you see, it is much more simpler. You don't need to understand that complexity of data field types and creating tables and all of those select statements. None of those are required, right?
Yeah.
Unlike your SQL or PLSQL. So it's very simple user interface with simply check boxes and drop downs, and that's all
Yeah,
required.
but the custom report what you created, you should have that logic, right? If not,
Yeah.
how do you get the data?
So that's what I mentioned. See, custom
Uh-huh.
reporting is a completely different. That is
Okay.
why I had discussed this right in my first
Okay.
class, right?
So, yeah, everywhere Prism ETL is a hard part, but here the ETL is
Right.
easy, but then the reporting is a
Yeah,
complex.
right. Reporting is also easy. So once you know the logic, it's easy. So unlike reporting in other technologies, again, you don't have any SQL, PLSQL, nothing of that is required.
Oh,
So in
okay.
Workday, everything is easy for that matter.
Hmm.
Okay.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So in reporting, I mean, we have different kinds of reports, right? So do
Mhm.
we use only the advanced reports for
Yeah.
Prism, or can we use the matrix and composite in all those reports also?
No, for getting data into Prism, your data source from Workday is always an advanced report. Okay.
Okay.
But for your analytics, once your Prism data is created, then on top of that, you can do your analytics. And for that, you can use matrix reports, custom reports, composite reports, transposed reports, advanced reports. So for analytics, you can use any of your reports. But for getting data into Prism, only advanced report is used. Okay.
So you mean to say that from advanced report we get the data into Prism, and for
Mhm.
analytics again we go into Workday to do the use
Yeah.
the Prism report to in Workday to make the composite or metrics reports and all.
Yes, yes, yes. So, see, what is Prism doing? Prism is simply getting data from different sources, multiple sources. This could be Workday, non-Workday, multiple Workday sources, multiple non-Workday sources. It is there blending and transforming and modifying your data. And finally, the output of that entire exercise is a data source. So now once you have your data source, you can create your custom reports like you do on any normal data source. So from there
Mm-hmm.
to finally visualize that data, you again create your Workday reports. So now you can create your matrix reports, discovery boards, composite reports to then do reporting on that transform data. Okay.
Okay, so with this, I understand that we are getting data from different systems like
Mm-hmm,
SAP or Oracle or Workday,
mm-hmm.
and then add them into one report in Prism. And then
Yeah.
for analytics, again, we are going to Workday. But will there be a requirement where they say that they want the report in SAP, the analytics in SAP or anything like that? Then how do you go with it? In Workday, we know
No,
that we have
I
composite
haven't
and all.
seen. See, the only reason a company would go for Prism is when
Mhm.
they want to make Workday or Prism as the reporting hub, right? So the
Okay.
projects that I have dealt with, see, Prism is not a free to use uh, option, right? You actually pay for your Prism usage,
Mm-hmm.
right? So in Prism, you're getting data from different sources and transforming them. And then again, you'll not use a third party system to again do reporting, right? So all the
Okay.
use cases that I have seen, the only reason an organization would invest in Prism is when they want to make Workday or Prism the central reporting hub or their central analytics hub. But still, if you still want to do it, you can still build integrations for that. Obviously, you'll have to again build integrations from Workday to your third party system. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Uh, all right. So creating base data set using Workday data, that is the first data set that we are looking at. And how do we do that? We have seen that in the data catalog report, you can go to the option create, and from there you select the option to create from custom report, right? The next thing, okay, before I write this down, let me also discuss the scenario that we are trying to build here. So if you see here, I have basically created three custom reports, and let's go ahead and look at them. So the first custom report that I have built is, or let me open all three of them. Reporting. So I have created three custom reports. One is company structure. The second one is supervisory structure. And the third one is worker details. So this is my company structure, which basically is getting me all the company details. So this is my company, and these are the different sectors those companies belong to. The second one, I have created a supervisory structure. Now, Anita, this is your input or your selection parameters, right? So this is where you specify the input criteria
I
for
didn't get
running
you
your
what
report.
exactly you're trying to do in the second stage. After custom reports, what we are doing supervisory structure, what exactly? Sorry, I couldn't follow you in the
These
here.
are all custom reports,
Uh-huh.
and using these custom reports, I'm trying to get or trying to fetch different kind of data into my Prism environment. Okay, and I'm
Okay.
just explaining you what these custom reports are
Okay,
getting me.
you have the different
So the
custom
first
reports.
report is getting me the company
Yeah,
structure.
yeah, yeah. Gotcha.
The
Okay.
second report is getting me the supervisory structure. So
Mm-hmm.
supervisory is an organization in Workday to which your
Mm-hmm.
employees belong to.
I got it. Okay.
So this report gets me all the supervisory orgs, and there are 176 supervisory orgs, and
Mm-hmm.
these organizations belong to specific sectors. So if you see, if I look at human
Uh-huh.
resources is an organization which belongs to my energy sector. Okay, and finance and administration, again an organization which belongs to life sciences sector. Now, why is this important? Because it is this interrelationship between different data that I'll use to transform or blend or join my data from different sources. So if you see my first report, which is getting me the company details, and the
Mm-hmm.
second report, which is getting me the supervisory details, it
Mm-hmm.
has this sector in common. So now I know that finance and administration, this organization,
Mm-hmm.
it belongs to or it is linked to Latin America because both of them have life sciences in common, right? So I'll use this common factor between different data that I'm importing to
Mm-hmm.
then join and club and modify and union that data,
Okay, so sector
right?
is your joining
Right,
criteria. Mm-hmm.
right. And finally, each of these organizations have workers. So my third data is the list of workers. So if you see Logan McNeil, or
Mm-hmm.
let's look at Steve Morgan. Steve Morgan is a worker who belongs to Global Modern Services. So this is the joining criteria between my employee and a given supervisory org. So
Okay.
every data trying to get, it
Mm-hmm.
has a link to the other data. If I don't have that link, I'll not be able to join data from different sources,
Yeah, got it.
right? So I'll get three of these data sources, three different pieces of data from Workday, but then
Yeah.
I am also getting some data from outside Workday. Plan called stock plans, but in Workday's compensation, you cannot actually track what stocks were granted to a given worker. So that management of stocks happens outside Workday.
Mm-hmm.
So in this use case, I also have the stock grants of the employees, which is probably managed in some third party system. And so I'm also getting that data from outside Workday into Workday. So this is that flat file that I'll be using. And if I quickly look at the structure of this file, this is a comma separated file that I've built. I'm basically getting the worker, the employee ID of that worker. Now this is what links, if you see, again this flat file data with my data in Workday.
Okay.
All right. So here I'm getting the worker, the employee ID, the different stocks that have been assigned to them, the
So
stock.
you directly connected to this
No,
GF03
this
document?
is still outside. This is still outside. I'll
Uh-huh.
fetch it.
Okay.
Okay, I'm just trying to show you that overall scenario that I'm
Mm.
trying to build.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll be getting some data from Workday and some data from outside Workday, and
Mm-hmm.
my ultimate requirement is to get all companies and the associated employees and all the stocks granted for them. But
Okay.
not just that, I also want to do some analytics to understand, for example, the head count of each of my companies, the gender count, and the different business units in my companies and so on and so forth. So
Okay.
ultimately, that is what I'm trying to accomplish through this use case.
Mm.
Okay, and for that, I'm using different data sources. All right, so as we build our data sets, this would make a lot more sense. So I have already created one data set for getting my company loaded into my Prism. But then I also need to load the other organizations. So I'll create another data set. I'll go back to the data catalog. I want to create a new data set, and I'm again doing it from a custom report. So I'm saying from custom report. This time my custom report is this one because I want to load my supervisory details as well. Okay, now if you see, this custom report comes with those prompts. So if I go back, the moment I execute this report, if I can do that once again, if I go to the actions and run this report or execute this report, it will ask me for some selection parameters. So obviously, even from the data set, when this data sets executes this report, it
Mhm.
will have to execute it using the same selection parameters. So if you see, there are two parameters. One is date and the organization, which is what Workday is asking me to specify the value for. So for date, I'm saying always get data for today's date, which is basically the date that data set is executing. Okay, so today is a dynamic field and it will always return the system date. Okay, instead of me having to specify a static date, I've specified a dynamic value. And for organization, I want to select the same organization, which is Global Modern Services. So I'm selecting Global Modern Services. This is an organization, a test organization, which exists in this system. Okay, again, I have the ability to specify the environment restrictions. I don't have to do that. This is an optional field. So I'll simply say OK. I can again specify the run frequency. I don't have to define the integration schedule now. We'll see how you define the schedule later by editing the schedule. I'll simply say OK, simply run now. Again, I would give a name to my data set. So what I'll do is again use the same naming convention. Let me quickly go back and see what was the naming convention I had used. Okay, this is what I had used. WB, I'll quickly copy this. This is my base data set number 2. So I'll simply change it to 02. And here I'll call it supervisory details. Supervisory details. Again, I want to run this in replace mode and not in append mode. And okay. So my second data set is created. If I refresh my data catalog, I'll have to say it done. Okay, it still doesn't reflect here because to our second data set, we have not assigned the tag yet. So I would quickly search for remove this tag. So this is that second data set I have created. I would quickly open it and assign it to the tag that we created, which is Jan 5th, save. Again, if you see, Workday has simply identified all the fields from my custom report and added those two additional fields, load ID and timestamp. I can view a snippet of the data. It is getting me the same data as my custom report had. Okay, I would quickly go back to my data catalog and create my third data set as well. And this is to fetch worker details. So this is my third custom report. It doesn't have any report selection criteria, so it shows as blank. Okay, run now. Okay, I would. So this is my base data set number 3, and this is worker details. And okay,
One data set you are getting from the flat file, right?
that I have not created yet. That is something we'll do later. Okay, so for now I am only fetching data from Workday. Okay, uh, so we'll look at this example step by step in a progressive manner, and we'll talk about all of those aspects. Okay, so what I've done now, I can, let's filter on this tag. So I've created 3 data sets. The source for all 3 of those data sets is a Workday report. All right. Okay. So now let's quickly write that down. So this flat file is something we'll go ahead and use as we build our complete example. I just showed you so that you understand the overall scenario. Okay, so what is the criteria, or what is the various options we saw for creating a data set from a custom report? Okay, so select the custom report, right? Then we specify the report selection criteria, which is if there is a criteria on that report. If there isn't, then you don't have to do that. Then third thing, we define the environment
What is this
restrictions.
criteria that you are talking about?
Okay, again the same thing. This criteria. Okay, so this is your report selection criteria.
Okay, the prompts that we give.
Exactly. Okay, next we specified the environment restrictions. Here specify the restricted to environment.
I mean, what can we mention here when we say restricted to environment? What is that? Is it?
Anita, we have already discussed this. So here I specified that you can restrict your data set to run for implementation or production or a specific environment,
Sorry,
right?
this is Harita.
Oh, sorry, Harita. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Okay. 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 So, the restricted to environment, let me quickly create a new one, right? Sorry. Uh, from custom report. So what happens is many times here you have the option restricted to. So let's say you're building your data set and you don't want this data set to be executed in production, right? At least for now. So here then you can when you select a given environment, so what happens is when you define the integration schedule, or even if without an integration, when you rerun this data set to fetch new data, it will check this environment restrictions, right? It will see whether the environment restrictions that you have defined here matches the environment in which that data set is trying to fetch data. If and only if there is a match, it will get data. If if there is no match, then it will basically fail. So this is simply an additional criteria which allows you to restrict uh, your integration run to a specific environment. Again, let's say once you have gone live in production, you can specify the environment to production. Now, what is the advantage? The advantage is by mistake, you are not going to load any production data in your non-production environments. So this is simply an additional criteria which allows you to restrict whether that integration would run or not run in a given environment. It could be your sandbox implementation, your preview environment, your production environment, and so on and so forth. Make sense?
Yes, so basically, this is for integrations when we are converting the data. I mean,
No,
transferring the
not
data
for
from
integrations.
other systems.
So, okay. So this is for your data load. Even for data
Oh,
load, Workday uses an integration,
mhm.
right? So what I mean by that is, and this is something we'll look at later. So ultimately, it has to get, see, one thing to understand that even though Prism is within Workday, it's logically a separate environment, right? And that is why we are using custom reports to get data from Workday into Prism, right? Which means when I need to get new data, I'll have to
Can
basically
we also
rerun.
use standard reports?
No, because you cannot
Okay.
directly modify standard reports. So for using a report, there are few criterias. Your report should be enabled for Prism. So obviously a standard report you'll have to, so you can use standard reports, but you'll have to copy it and then enable it for Prism, right? The way we
Okay,
do
okay,
our
got it.
normal reporting. Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. So if I need to fetch new data, I'll have to go to actions. If you see data set, and I can basically run the integration once again, right? So this environment is for these integration runs, for fetching data from Workday, outside Workday into your Prism landscape. Make sense?
Yes, thank you.
All right. Okay. So we'll look at this integration, Anita. As I mentioned, we for now we have just fetched data using the run now option, but later on we'll see how you can also schedule an integration to run automatically. So maybe on a daily basis, because your employees are will keep getting hired. So specifically with respect to your employees, any new employees who is hired into your system, or who is terminated from your system, you want to keep your data set up to date, right? And no one is going to do that every day, every hour. So that has to be scheduled to run automatically, and you can
So
do
you
that
use
by
that,
specifying this.
how, why do you use this integration data set? It is for the flat files you use for?
We use it for custom report as well as for your SFTP. So for both of them, you can use,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
You can define these schedules. For flat files, you don't do, because flat file is a file that you have on your system,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that is something you select manually. It is simply an attachment,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you
SFTP is just
use,
a location, right?
it
So
is
any
a
file.
location, right? So that is a standard. What is the difference from a file and from SFTP? So
Mm-hmm.
SFTP is a server location
Mm-hmm.
which is dedicated for that Prism data
File.
run,
Yeah.
and that's why you have the ability to define an integration schedule. Not for a flat file. For flat file, it is on your own local machine, so obviously you cannot go ahead and say Workday that get
So
every day
SFTP
run, and
location can be a flat file or can be a Excel file. Is there a restriction?
yeah. It could
SFTP
be,
file.
no, there's no, it could be a CSV file, a flat file,
Yeah.
a text file, right?
So how it will differs then? And then you are saying that custom report, if you go for it, it's different, and if you go to the SFTP, it's different, right?
In
Am I
what
getting it
sense?
wrong? No, you said the integration schedules, you will set it for the SFTP, not for the flat files which are sitting on your desktop. Am I correct?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Right. So where were we? We were looking at the specify the restricted to environment, and why would you do that? Uh, when a data set integration runs in an environment, right? And the configured or the restricted to option does not match the data set, integration fails, right? And retrieves no data from the selected and retrieves no data, right? So why would I specify the restricted to? So restrict the environment to avoid inadvertently, excuse me for the spellings, uh, transferring test data, for example, to a non-test environment, and vice versa, right? As I mentioned, you're still testing your Prism data set, and you don't want someone to by mistake run it in production. So you'll obviously exclude that production environment. And once it has gone live, obviously you don't want your production data to be loaded in an implementation tenant, wherein others would be able to access, let's say, sensitive compensation data. And so you'll specify the restricted to environment to production, right? But then obviously we have seen this is an optional setting. So if you don't want to use it for whatever reasons, you can simply leave it blank. Okay, the next thing, specify an integration schedule. So for now, we have not specified the integration schedule. We have just looked at the option. However, we have just seen the run now option. So specify the integration schedule. Okay, a very important thing, as I mentioned, specify a unique name for the data set. And the reason for that is data set name cannot be changed after the data set is saved. So for any reason you want to change your name, you'll have to create a new data set and delete existing one. All right. Okay, we also looked at the data load options, and we saw that there are basically two options which are available. One is the replace mode for the subsequent integration run. So when you specify the option as replace, Workday deletes the existing data in the data set and replaces it with the data or the new data. Or when I say new data, it's just not the new data, it's the full data that is coming in the new file, right? That's what I mean by new data. It imports from the custom report, right? And the append mode, Workday basically keeps the existing data in the data set and adds to it the new data. Again, new data doesn't mean only new data, it means all new data or every data record which is coming from the new integration run. So don't get confused thinking it's only new data, right? Or non or only unique data, if I have to put it that way. that it imports from the new integration run, right? So as I mentioned, this may or this would lead to duplicate records. So only use it for your trending use cases, which is basically wherein you want to do that month by month or week by week or year by year analysis, right? To see how your data is changing on that recurring basis. So your trending reporting is something you do with your append mode. Okay, two other things that we saw is your WPA fields, right? So the moment you load data with a custom report, Workday creates WPA fields for data set or in data set created using custom reports, right? Okay, the first field that we saw was WPA underscore load ID. If I can quickly show that to you people once again. So the first field is, if you see, load ID and then the load timestamp. Load ID defines the specific integration run as part of which the data was loaded. So this is the Workday ID or the unique reference ID of that integration run. And this is basically the timestamp when that particular record was loaded. In this scenario, the timestamp is same because obviously we have loaded all of these records as part of a single integration run. All right. So these are the two fields that Workday automatically adds. So unique identifier of the integration run used to load that particular record, right? And the WPA load timestamp. So self-explanatory, the time of the integration run that loaded that particular record. All right. So today we created 3 base data sets and we created all of them through our custom report. So what happens next? Now we have our data loaded into our Prism environment. We'll go ahead and transform that data. And we do that using derived data sets.